Hi, you're watching the Reddit Confessions channel. I was staring at the TV screen, but I wasn't watching it. The volume was low, the light from it flickering across the living room like a slow, dying heartbeat. She stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out like she was waiting for something, or someone. I counted to 10 in my head. She didn't blink. I said her name, twice. Finally, she turned. I can't do this anymore, Merritt. There it was. No warning, no fight, no explanation. Just a 7-word sentence that hit me in the chest like a dropped piano. I didn't even ask what this meant. I knew. We both knew. She walked across the room and picked up her keys like she was grabbing a snack. You don't mean anything to me anymore, she added quieter, like it was some detail she'd almost forgotten to mention. Not in the way you think I should. I felt like I had suddenly entered a room where I didn't exist. Like I'd been standing in my own life, watching someone else speak my lines. Her name is Danica, and apparently I had stopped being real to her weeks ago. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't do any of the things you'd expect a guy to do when his wife, the woman who used to fall asleep curled up on his chest, looks at him like he's wallpaper. I just stood there, shoes half on, jaw clenched, heart blurry. She left 5 minutes later. Didn't say where. I didn't ask. The next morning, I packed my bag before the coffee machine finished dripping. I didn't leave a note. I didn't even take everything. Just enough to disappear quietly. No one saw me leave the building. No one asked questions. I just evaporated. But here's what I didn't know at the time. She had been planning that night. And not just the words she said. Everything. There was a second phone. Private calendar. A dinner reservation booked under someone else's name. There were messages, photos, and a conversation between her and her mother that made my blood go cold. But I didn't find any of that until 3 weeks later, when I walked into a pawn shop in a different state and saw my wedding ring for sale. I didn't plan to go into the pawn shop. I just needed a place to stand in the shade and get my bearings. The Arizona sun was ruthless that day, and my motel room smelled like wet cardboard. I'd walked farther than I thought, just trying to forget what my life used to feel like. My wallet was lighter than it should have been, emotionally and financially. I had no plan, no timeline, and no one checking in on me. So when I stepped into that dusty little pawn shop near the intersection of nothing and nowhere, I expected nothing more than cool air and awkward silence. What I got was my wedding ring staring back at me from behind a scratched glass case. At first, I thought I was imagining it. It had that same tiny nick on the inside, from the time I dropped it while fixing our clogged kitchen sink. I used to joke that the ring was more loyal than half the people I knew. I leaned closer. There it was. That same microscopic scratch that no one but me would ever notice. I asked the guy behind the counter, a bored man named Benny with a ketchup stain on his shirt, if I could see it. He handed it to me with a shrug. It was mine. Undeniably mine. I asked how he got it. He flipped open his logbook and pointed to a line written in hurried cursive. Danica R. The handwriting hit me like a slap. It was hers. Fast, messy, left slanted. The same signature she used on our lease, birthday cards, and once scrawled across my back in permanent marker during a drunk camping trip. It had only been pawned 6 days ago. That meant she sold it after I left. I asked Benny if he remembered her. He didn't hesitate. Tall, green jacket, sunglasses indoors. Talked fast. Smelled expensive. That was her. She always wore too much perfume when she was hiding something. I asked if she said anything else. He thought for a second and then laughed. Yeah, she said. Don't need reminders of mistakes. Mistakes. That's what I'd been reduced to. Not a man. Not a husband. A mistake in a glass box with a $110 price tag. I bought the ring back without another word. Benny offered a plastic bag. I declined. I shoved it deep in my pocket like a wound I didn't want exposed to sunlight. I left the shop and sat on a bench 2 blocks down, staring at my hand. She hadn't just moved on. She had erased me. But here's the part one haven't told you yet. The part that changed everything. On the back of the pawn ticket, scribbled faintly, was a reminder note in her handwriting. Pick up Max at 6, same hotel. Max, A name I hadn't heard before. Not a family member. Not a coworker. And definitely not a dog. That's when it hit me. Danica hadn't just replaced me. She had rehearsed it. And I was about to find out just how far she'd gone. I spent that whole night pacing my motel room like some ghost who hadn't accepted he was dead. I kept taking the pawn ticket out of my pocket, running my thumb over the fading ink. Pick up Max at 6, same hotel. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. What gnawed at me wasn't the name, it was the word same. It meant there had been a before. And if there had been a before, there was probably a now. I told myself to let it go, that I'd left for a reason. But there I was at 5:42 p.m. The next day, sitting in a car I'd borrowed from the motel manager, parked across the street from the Copper Lantern Inn, a place that looked like it hadn't been cleaned properly since the late 90s. The lot was half empty, except for a silver Lexus parked under a dying palm tree. I hadn't seen that car before. At 6:03 p.m., I watched a man, mid-40s, tanned, buttoned down half untucked like he was going for that casually rich look, step out of the lobby and light a cigarette. He didn't look nervous. He looked like someone who did this often. Then I saw her. Danica. Same green jacket, same sunglasses, same expressionless face. She walked up to him and hugged him. Not politely, intimately, like she belonged to him now. He handed her a keycard. Room 213. I didn't know what my plan was. I just knew I couldn't drive away. My hands were trembling, and my brain screamed, "Don't do this." But I did. I waited until they went inside. Then I walked up the stairs, past the vending machine that buzzed like it had something trapped inside. I stood outside room 213, heart pounding so loud I thought it would echo through the door. I didn't knock. I didn't even breathe. Then I heard her laugh. I hadn't heard that sound in months. Not at home. Not around me. Not when I made jokes or tried to lighten the tension. But there it was, behind a paper-thin wall, floating in the air with the sound of wine glasses clinking and her voice saying, "You're so bad." I stepped back, almost tripping over my own feet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Text from my landlord. He wanted to know if I'd be renewing the lease. I hadn't answered him in days. I looked back at the door. There were two voices inside. One woman, one man, and the clink of ice being poured into something stronger than wine. I wanted to kick the door down. I wanted to throw her words, "You don't mean anything to me," back in her face. But all I did was turn around and walk to the stairwell. That's when I saw it. A delivery guy walking up with 2 pizzas and a bag of something greasy. He knocked on 215, right next door. In that moment, something unhinged in me. I approached him, handed him $60 in cash and said, "I live there. I forgot my wallet. Can you let me see the receipt inside the bag?" He shrugged and handed it over. Taped to the box was a note, scribbled in Danica's handwriting, "Max, don't forget the charger this time. Love, D." The food was for him. She'd been here before. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't some late-night mistake. She lived in this lie. And I was the fool who used to leave dinner in the oven waiting for her to come home. I didn't sleep that night. Not a single minute. I sat on the floor of my motel room with the ring in one hand and that pizza receipt in the other, replaying every ordinary moment from the past year like it was a hidden code I had somehow missed. Every late night she blamed on client deadlines. Every business trip with no photos. Every time she laughed at her phone and said, "It's just work." All of it felt like a script, and I hadn't realized I was the background character in her perfectly directed scene. I thought about knocking on the door again, about barging in and confronting both of them. Max, whoever he really was, and Danica with her practiced indifference. But something held me back. It wasn't fear. It was disgust. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me shattered. Not after she'd thrown away our history like expired takeout. I decided to find out who Max was, but I wasn't prepared for what I uncovered. The next morning, I drove to the Lexus dealership nearby. Don't ask me why, it was impulse. The silver one in the lot from last night had a custom plate, and I'd memorized the digits. The service guy didn't care much when I asked about the model, but when I slipped him a 20 and said I was thinking of surprising a friend who drives one, He got chatty. He didn't give me a name, but he mentioned the guy brings it in every other month and always books under a corporate account. Consulting firm. Real smooth-talking guy. Smells like cologne and bad decisions. I called the number on the dealership's file the moment I stepped outside. The voicemail picked up, robotic and cold. You've reached the voicemail of Maxwell Trenton. Trenton Strategies. I froze. Trenton Strategies wasn't just any consulting firm. Danica had done branding work for them last year. She spent 3 months commuting for face-to-face strategy sessions, which now sounded like code for hotel rooms and after-hours wine. I Googled him. There he was, Maxwell Trenton, CEO, featured in glossy magazines, smiling in a tailored suit. I clicked through the company's site, my stomach churning, and then I saw it, a team photo. My wife stood in the back row, right beside him, her hand on his shoulder like it belonged there. The timestamp said it was taken 8 weeks ago. That was during the week she told me she was visiting her aunt in Portland. Her aunt who's been dead for 3 years. This wasn't a fling. This was structured, built, and branded like one of her pitch decks. She hadn't stumbled into Max. She'd drawn a line straight to him, slowly pushing me off the page one lie at a time. And here's what made my blood run cold. In one of the bios beneath the team section, there was a blog post written by Maxwell himself. It was titled, Knowing When to Cut Dead Weight. I opened it, expecting corporate fluff. Instead, it was filled with lines about recognizing when people no longer serve your personal evolution and how stagnant relationships are anchors disguised as comfort. It didn't feel theoretical. It felt personal. Like he wasn't just talking about business partners. Like he was talking about me. By the time I'd read the last sentence of Max Trenton's blog post, I had already booked a ticket. Not out of impulse, out of obsession. I wasn't just chasing closure anymore. I needed to understand what kind of man you had to become to convince someone else's wife to erase her entire marriage like formatting a hard drive. I found out that Max was giving an in-person leadership seminar 2 towns over, a networking event packed with overconfident executives and fake smiles. Perfect. I wasn't planning to confront him. Not yet. I just needed to see him, study him, figure out what version of man I'd apparently failed to become. I walked into that hotel conference center like a ghost. No one looked twice at me. I wore a baseball cap low over my face, sat in the back row, and kept my head down. When he walked out onto the stage, the room reacted like a cult seeing their prophet. He was everything I wasn't. Polished, sharp, speaking in punchy phrases like, risk breeds results, and trim emotional liabilities. The audience ate it up. But me? All I saw was a thief dressed as a mentor. At one point, he told a story, some anonymous anecdote about a woman stuck in a loveless marriage with a man who was more passive than present. The phrasing made my stomach twist. He didn't use names, but he might as well have. He talked about how she deserved more, how she finally made the bold decision to leave, and how now they were building a new life without permission or apology. The room applauded. I wanted to scream. Instead, I opened my phone and started typing every word. Not for revenge. Not yet. I just wanted proof. After the seminar, there was a cocktail hour in the lounge. I stood by the window, half hidden behind a potted plant, watching Max shake hands and charm every person who came near him. Then something unexpected happened. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, smiled, and walked away from the crowd toward the elevators. Curiosity got the better of me. I followed at a distance. He didn't go up, he went outside. That's when I saw her. Danica. Same green jacket. Same smirk. Same woman who once cried when I wrote her a song and now looked at this man like he was her future. She kissed him. Not with hesitation, but with certainty. Like she'd finally chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. I ducked behind a concrete pillar, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. I wanted to burst out, yell her name, demand answers. But I didn't, because in that moment, watching them from a shadow, I realized something worse than betrayal. She wasn't ashamed. She was proud. And that's when a new thought rooted itself in my head. Quiet, dark, and impossible to ignore. If she could erase me so cleanly, Maybe I could become someone she'd never recognize. Someone who wasn't soft, or slow, or forgettable. Someone who could rewrite the ending. After the seminar, I drove for hours without a destination. Just me and the silence thick enough to suffocate. I couldn't shake the image of her lips on his. Not because I was shocked she had moved on, but because of how natural it looked. How right she seemed in someone else's arms. It haunted me, made me wonder if I'd ever really had her at all, or if she'd simply worn a version of herself she knew I'd fall for. When I finally checked into a roadside motel that barely had a working lock, I sat down and opened the one thing I hadn't looked at since I left. The old leather-bound notebook I found in the back of her desk drawer. I didn't take it out of curiosity. I took it by accident, thinking it was one of my journals. But it wasn't mine. The first few pages were harmless, design sketches, shopping lists, a couple of random quotes about ambition and change. But then I found the page that froze my blood. It was dated almost a year ago, and at the top, in her handwriting, it read, "Contingency plan. If it doesn't work with merit." Below it, bullet points. Real ones. Cold ones. Numbered like steps in a manual. 1. Keep finances separate without raising suspicion. 2. Resume portfolio for solo clients. 3. Avoid conflict. Guilt makes him quieter. 4. Increase travel. 5. Start soft exit. Soft exit. That's what my marriage had been reduced to. A controlled demolition. A polite ghosting of a life we built together. Further down, I found a name scribbled repeatedly in the margins. M. Trenton. Sometimes just initials. Sometimes hearts drawn next to it. She had been testing his name out long before she tested anything physical. She wrote, "He gets it. He sees me. Merritt doesn't. Merritt never did." The rest of the notebook spiraled. Affirmations about choosing joy over loyalty. Clippings from articles about reinvention. Even an unsent email draft to her mother that began, "I've made up my mind. Don't try to talk me out of it." My hands were shaking. Not from anger. From humiliation. I wasn't even worth a second draft in her goodbye plan. That night I couldn't sleep. So I did something uncharacteristic. Emailed Max. Under a fake name, I wrote a pitch pretending to be a startup founder looking for branding help. I complimented his writing, his philosophy, even quoted that disgusting blog post about cutting dead weight. I made sure I sounded like someone who admired him, someone eager for his attention. A day later, I got a response. Not from an assistant. From him directly. He liked my vision. He wanted to meet, and I smiled for the first time in weeks. Because now I wasn't chasing closure. I was inviting my replacement to come shake hands with the man he stepped over. Max suggested a rooftop bar downtown, the kind with $18 cocktails and too many mirrors. I wore a crisp shirt I bought that morning and borrowed a name from someone who'd never existed. Jonas Wilkes, founder of a non-existent e-commerce platform that specialized in luxury pet furniture. I know, ridiculous, but apparently just absurd enough to pass for real. He arrived late, naturally. The kind of man who assumes time waits for him. When he finally shook my hand, his grip was firm, rehearsed, almost robotic. He didn't recognize me. Not even a flicker of doubt in his eyes. That stung more than I expected. I had been nothing to him from the beginning. Just a hurdle he cleared with charm and cologne. We sat at a table near the edge, the city humming beneath us. He ordered bourbon neat without looking at the menu. I sipped something minty and ridiculous. We talked business, or rather, I let him talk. He went on about narrative equity and emotional positioning. Buzzwords he wore like cologne. I asked questions I already knew the answers to, watching how he phrased things, what he avoided, and how often he checked his phone. Then, somewhere between a joke about founders burning out and a story about a CEO who wasn't built for pressure, he mentioned her. Not by name. Just a passing line. You'd be surprised how often the people closest to you aren't rooting for your growth. Took me years to figure that out. Hell, I had to help someone walk away from her anchor once. Took guts on both our parts. Her anchor, that was me. The man who folded laundry and memorized her coffee order. The man who didn't root for her growth. as if staying loyal and showing up made me dead weight. He didn't know he was confessing to the man he'd helped erase. And I kept smiling like a fanboy while every word he said built a furnace in my gut. I excused myself and went to the restroom. Not to cry. I had already done that in every cheap motel between here and heartbreak. I just needed air. I splashed cold water on my face and looked in the mirror. For a second, I didn't recognize myself either. Maybe that was the point. When I returned, Max was laughing at something on his phone. He glanced up, wiped his eyes and said, "Sorry, my girl's got this dark humor thing. It's addictive." Then he locked his screen and I saw the wallpaper. A photo of her, Danica, wearing my hoodie, the one she told me she accidentally donated. I don't remember much after that. Just the click of my pulse in my ears and the weight of something shifting inside me. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't even angry. I was empty. And inside that emptiness, a plan was forming. Not revenge. Not yet. But something colder. Something that would make both of them finally see me, even if it was the last thing they ever did. 2 weeks after that rooftop meeting, I sent Danica a message. Just one line. No hello. No sign off. I wrote, "I see you finally found someone who deserves your lies." She didn't reply. But 5 hours later, I got a call from a blocked number. I didn't answer. Not the first time. Not the fifth. She eventually left a voicemail. Her voice was soft, cautious. A performance I used to mistake for love. "Merritt, I don't know what you think you saw. Can we talk?" That's when I realized. She only wanted to talk now that she felt watched. She wasn't reaching out from guilt. She was reacting to losing control. Instead of replying, I booked a flight. No, not to confront her. To leave. Really leave. For weeks I had been hovering in her shadow, collecting fragments of a life that had already ended. It wasn't strength that got me on that plane. It was finally accepting I didn't need closure from people who had rehearsed my erasure. I'd spent too long trying to figure out how I lost her. Turns out I never had her to begin with. A few days after I landed in Vermont, a place she'd never think to look, I rented a small cottage near a lake. I started photographing the sunrise. I made coffee slowly. I stopped checking my phone. It wasn't some fairy tale recovery. It was messy, quiet. But one morning, I looked up and realized I hadn't thought about either of them in hours. That was the moment I knew I was healing. Then something happened I didn't expect. I got a message request from a woman named Elise, Max's ex-wife. Apparently, she found my fake company's website through the seminar sign-up. She had her own story to tell. One filled with cheating, lies, and quiet endurance. We exchanged long, vulnerable emails for weeks. And one rainy afternoon, she wrote, "Funny how the people they called anchors ended up floating just fine. It's been 8 months. Elise and I still talk every day. We're not rushing anything. But we understand each other in a way that only people who've survived calculated betrayal can. Turns out, healing doesn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes it just means finally choosing yourself." And Danica? She sent one last message. "I made a mistake." I didn't reply, because the man she once erased no longer exists. And the one who replaced him knows better than to rewrite the past. End of the story. Merritt didn't get revenge, he got something better. Peace. And maybe even a new beginning. If this journey moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs it. And let us know in the comments which moment hit you hardest, the pawn shop discovery, the seminar, or the final message from Danica. We'll be reading your thoughts here on Reddit Confessions. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the best response is no response at all.